In the vast and shimmering expanse of the Star Wars galaxy, where stars are like grains of sand scattered across a velvet ocean, one name carries a weight that can move mountains. It is a name that has survived the rise and fall of empires, the birth of stars, and the shifting of entire civilizations. This name belongs to a being whose physical presence was small, yet whose spirit was so immense that it touched the lives of every living soul connected to the cosmic energy we call the Force. This is the expansive and legendary story of Master Yoda, a figure who became the very definition of wisdom and power throughout the ages. His life did not simply happen. It unfolded like a slow-burning star, casting light into the darkest corners of the universe for nearly 1,000 years. To understand Yoda, one must first look back nearly 9 centuries before the great turning point known as the Battle of Endor. Yoda was born into a world that the rest of the galaxy has never seen, a place hidden behind curtains of nebula and distance. Throughout his incredibly long life, which spanned 900 years of history, he never once spoke the name of his homeworld. He never described the trees that grew there, the color of the sky, or the culture of his people. This silence was not an act of forgetfulness, but a choice. By keeping his origins a secret, he maintained a sense of mystery that made him seem like a gift from the Force itself, rather than just a citizen of a specific planet. His species, small in stature with green skin and large, expressive ears, remains one of the greatest riddles in the history of the stars. They are rarely seen, appearing only once in several generations, and they possess a connection to the living energy of the universe that is far more profound than that of almost any other race. Even as a very young child, a youngling in the language of those who study the stars, Yoda's connection to the Force was breathtaking. It was not something he had to work to find. It was like a second heartbeat that thrummed within him from the moment he drew his first breath. This natural talent was so obvious and so powerful that he was quickly welcomed into the Jedi Order, the ancient group of guardians who dedicated their lives to peace and justice. As he began his journey on the planet Coruscant, the gleaming center of the galaxy, he had to go through the same rituals as every other student. Yet he did so with a level of focus that left his teachers in awe. One of the most important moments in any young student's life is a ritual called the Gathering. For Yoda, this meant traveling to the frozen world of Ilum, a planet where the wind howls like a wounded beast, and the ice is thick enough to hide secrets for eternity. Within the deep crystalline caves of this world, a student must find their Kyber crystal. This crystal is more than just a piece of mineral. It is a living heart, a focus point for energy that responds only to the specific person it is meant for. Yoda entered those caves alone, guided only by the whispers of the Force. He had to face his own internal shadows, his doubts and his fears in the cold darkness. When he finally emerged, he held a crystal that glowed with a pure, steady light, ready to be placed into the weapon of a peacekeeper. Under the watchful and ancient eyes of Professor Huyang, an architect droid who had served the Jedi for thousands of years, young Yoda began the delicate task of building his first lightsaber. This happened aboard a legendary training ship called the Crucible. Huyang, who possessed the records and designs for every lightsaber ever made, guided the young green student as he fit the metallic casing, the energy cells, and the focusing lens around the crystal. The resulting weapon was small, built to fit Yoda's diminutive hands, but it was a masterpiece of balance and grace. It was the tool that would mark the official start of his long walk through history. As he grew, rumors began to swirl about who exactly taught him the deeper mysteries of the galaxy. In the quiet hallways of the Jedi Temple, some whispered that his first true instructor was a legendary figure named Master Nkata del Gormo, a four-armed master of great height and kindness. While the scrolls of history find it difficult to prove these stories, they add to the myth of Yoda's youth. What is not a rumor, however, is his incredible rate of growth. For his species, the first century of life is usually considered a time of adolescence, a period of transition between childhood and adulthood. Yet, by the age of only 100, Yoda had already achieved what many spend their entire lives failing to reach. He was granted the rank of Jedi Master. For the next 800 years, Yoda dedicated every moment of his existence to sharing the light he had found. The sheer scale of his work as a teacher is almost impossible to wrap the mind around. It is believed that over the course of his lifetime, he personally trained or guided around 20,000 students. Imagine that for a moment. 20,000 warriors, protectors, and thinkers, all moving through the galaxy with a piece of Yoda's heart inside them. He shaped the Guardians of the Republic, the Peacekeepers of the Outer Rim, and the Masters who would eventually sit beside him on the High Council. His way of teaching was as unique as his appearance. He did not believe in simply giving his students the answers to their questions. To Yoda, knowledge was like a fruit that tasted best when the student climbed the tree to pick it themselves. He would often speak in riddles or wait in long, comfortable silences, allowing his students to struggle just enough to find their own path. He had a playful sense of humor that he used to keep his students humble. He knew that pride was a dangerous trap, and he used his small size and funny way of speaking to remind everyone that power does not come from how tall you stand or how loudly you shout. One of the most important things Yoda taught was that no one is ever truly perfect. He saw the world not as a place of black and white, but as a garden where even the smallest weed had a purpose. He believed that there was a spark of good, or at least the chance for good, in every living thing. This belief was the foundation of his soul. It made him more than just a trainer of warriors. It made him a shepherd for the spirit. He didn't just want his students to be good at fighting. He wanted them to be good at living. As time passed and Yoda rose to the position of Grand Master, the highest honor in the Order, he became a symbol of the Jedi themselves. People knew him for his distinctive way of speaking, putting his words in an order that made people stop and think about what he was actually saying. He also became known for his small walking stick, a gnarled piece of wood that he carried everywhere. For many years, his students wondered if he actually needed it to walk, or if he was just playing a joke on them, pretending to be frail to see if they would underestimate him. In reality, it was a bit of both. A practical tool and a lesson in not judging a book by its cover. But the most incredible part of Yoda's story during these middle centuries was his connection to the Force itself. His power was not just about his ability to lift heavy starships with a wave of his hand or his speed with a lightsaber, though he was unmatched in both. His true power was his sensitivity. He could sit in a Quarden on Coruscant and feel the ripples of a tragedy happening on the other side of the galaxy. He could sense the shifting of destiny and see flashes of what might happen in the future. He felt the universe as a living, breathing entity, and he acted as its humble servant. This deep connection led him to focus a great deal of his time on the youngest members of the Order. While other masters might focus only on their one specific apprentice, Yoda made it his mission to work with the younglings before they were even chosen by a teacher. He loved the Temple Gardens, a place of peace and green growing things amidst the city of metal. There, he would sit and listen to the problems of students who felt lost or afraid. He understood that a small crack in a young person's heart could grow into a great canyon of darkness later in life. So he worked tirelessly to mend those cracks with kindness and patience. He once famously helped a young student named Ahsoka Tano during a difficult time in her training. She was struggling to find her path, and Yoda, with a simple smile, told her that sometimes the most important things are found only when we stop looking for them so hard. It was this kind of wisdom, simple yet heavy with truth, that defined him. He knew that the Force was not a tool to be controlled, but a river to be followed. One of his most significant relationships was with a student named Dooku. This was a bond that started in the year 86 BBY, long before the Great Wars that would later tear the galaxy apart. Dooku was a man of great nobility and even greater potential. Yoda saw in him a brilliance that was rare even among the Jedi. They traveled together to dangerous worlds such as the jungle moon of Kashyyyk, where they faced monstrous creatures together. Yoda pushed Dooku to find a balance between his great pride and his duty to the light. They spent hours practicing with their lightsabers, not to see who was faster, but to understand the rhythm of their own hearts. Yoda hoped that Dooku would one day be the greatest of them all. However, even a master as wise as Yoda cannot control the choices of others. In the year 42 BBY, Dooku decided to leave the Jedi Order. It was a moment that felt like a cold wind blowing through the temple. For Yoda, it was a deeply personal sadness. When Dooku offered to give up his lightsaber, which was the symbol of his life as a Jedi, Yoda told him to keep it. This was a gesture of trust and love, a sign that Yoda still believed in the good within his old friend. He did not know then that this decision would eventually lead to a dark path for the entire galaxy. But even if he had known, his heart was such that he always chose to believe in the possibility of redemption. Throughout these years, Yoda remained a figure of mystery even to his closest friends, like Master Mace Windu. Windu was a man of strict rules and serious nature, and he often found Yoda's jokes and riddles to be confusing. Yet, there was a deep respect between them. Yoda understood that the Order needed both the iron will of Windu and his own soft, flowing wisdom. Together, they looked over a galaxy that was entering a golden age, yet Yoda could already feel the first faint whispers of a shadow returning from the past. He spent many hours in meditation, searching the currents of the Force for the meaning of this shadow. He taught his students that the dark side was not just a different way of using power, but a trap fueled by fear and the desire to possess things. He warned them that once you start down that dark path, it forever changes who you are. To combat this, he emphasized the importance of letting go. He taught that we must be ready to release everything we are afraid to lose, for attachment is the path to the dark side. In the hallways of the temple, Yoda was often seen surrounded by a flock of small children, all following him like ducklings. He would tell them stories of the ancient days, of heroes who won battles without ever drawing a weapon, and of the importance of the smallest blade of grass. He wanted them to understand that the Force was in everything, in the rocks, the trees, and the air they breathed. By teaching them to respect all life, he was building a foundation for a galaxy that could live in harmony. As the High Republic era reached its peak, Yoda's leadership was tested in ways that went beyond teaching. The galaxy was expanding, and with expansion came new dangers. He worked alongside other Grandmasters, sharing the heavy burden of leading thousands of Jedi. This was a time of great exploration and great hope, but Yoda never let his guard down. He knew that peace is a fragile thing, like a glass sculpture that must be protected from the wind. During this era, a group known as the Path of the Open Hand began to cause trouble. They were a cult that believed no one should use the Force, claiming that using the light caused a reaction in the dark. Yoda found himself in the middle of a conflict between planets like Aram and Arono, trying to negotiate peace where there was only hatred. In a meeting with the supreme leaders of the Republic on the capital world of Coruscant, Yoda felt a disturbance that chilled him to his core. It wasn't just a political disagreement, it was a shadow that felt cold and hungry. This shadow became real during a terrible event called the Night of Sorrow on a world named Dalna. It was there that Yoda discovered a secret so frightening that he decided it should never be written down in the official records. He encountered creatures called the Nameless, horrific beasts that could feed on the energy of a Force user, causing them to lose their minds and eventually turn into piles of gray dust. Yoda realized that some knowledge is too dangerous to keep, for if the wrong person found it, the results would be catastrophic. He chose to carry that burden alone, protecting the galaxy by keeping it in the dark about the true nature of that horror. Even during these dark discoveries, Yoda never stopped being a teacher. He spent time on a ship called the Starhopper, a vessel dedicated to training students while they traveled across the stars. He used this time to get away from the politics of the capital and get back to what he loved most, helping young people find their way. When a massive disaster happened in hyperspace, threatening to destroy entire solar systems, Yoda joined his mind with other Jedi across the galaxy. Together, they used the Force to move massive objects and save millions of lives. It was a display of power that showed the galaxy what the Jedi were truly capable of when they worked as one. The threat of the Nihil, a group of space pirates who used secret paths through space to attack without warning, also demanded Yoda's attention. During a mission on the planet Trimant 4, Yoda showed his mastery by catching falling debris from the sky and guiding it safely to the ground, all while ensuring that his students were safe. But even in the heat of battle, he was looking for the deeper cause of the trouble. He found a strange purple artifact on a pirate ship that suggested a connection to the ancient cult he had fought before. Suddenly, and without explaining why to the council, Yoda disappeared. He went on a secret journey with an elder named Tromac, seeking answers to the mysteries of the Nameless and the pirates. His absence was felt like a hole in the heart of the Jedi Order. His students, especially those he had trained closely, felt lost without his guidance. They wondered if their master was still alive, or if the darkness had finally claimed him. But Yoda knew that sometimes a leader must step away from the front lines to find the truth that will win the war. When he finally returned, he did so in a way that only Yoda could. In the middle of a desperate battle over the city of Coronet on Corellia, a massive ship was falling from the sky, destined to crash and kill thousands. Just as hope seemed lost, the ship slowed and stopped in midair, held by an invisible hand. Yoda had returned, and his power was greater than ever. He swept away the clouds of war and brought hope back to his friends. But he also brought a warning. He had learned that the ancient horrors and the new pirates were linked, and that the Jedi were facing a challenge that would require more than just lightsabers to overcome. This period of his life showed a side of Yoda that was both wise and slightly controversial. His choice to keep secrets, such as the truth about the Nameless, was based on his belief that the Jedi were not ready to face such a nightmare. He acted like a father protecting his children from a monster under the bed, even if it meant he had to stay awake all night to watch the door. This sense of responsibility was a heavy weight, but he carried it with the same grace and humor he used when teaching a youngling how to lift a small rock. As the golden age of the Republic began to slowly fade, Yoda continued to be the steady hand on the tiller of the Jedi Order. He saw students grow into masters, and he saw those masters take on students of their own. He watched as the galaxy changed, as technology advanced, and as new worlds joined the Republic. Through it all, he remained the same, small, green, and full of a light that never seemed to dim. He was the anchor that held the Jedi to their traditions, while also pushing them to look toward the future. But even as he worked to maintain peace, the shadows he had felt centuries before were growing longer. The departure of Dooku was just the beginning. Yoda could feel the balance of the Force shifting, like a scale being tipped by an invisible weight. He spent more time in his meditation garden, looking at the flowers and the water, trying to find the source of the unease. He knew that a storm was coming, a storm that would test everything the Jedi stood for. And he knew that he, as the oldest and wisest among them, would have to be the one to lead them through the rain. His life was a tapestry of thousands of stories, each one a lesson, each one a step on a journey that would eventually lead to the fate of the entire galaxy. From the mysterious world of his birth to the grand halls of Coruscant, Yoda remained a servant of the light. He was a master of the sword, a master of the mind, and a master of the soul. As this first part of his long legend draws to a close, we see him at the height of his influence, a being of pure wisdom, who was about to face the greatest darkness the universe had ever known. As the long, golden summer of the High Republic began to cool into the autumn of a new age, Master Yoda felt the change in his very bones. The galaxy was a different place than it had been when he was a mere century old. The gleaming spires of Coruscant seemed to grow taller and more crowded, while the outer reaches of the stars felt increasingly restless. For a being who had seen centuries of peace, these shifts were not just political. They were felt in the living breath of the universe. Yoda spent more time in the quiet, shadowed corners of the Jedi Temple, his mind reaching out to sense the coming tides. He knew that even the brightest light must eventually face the coming of evening, and he prepared himself and his students for what lay ahead. The departure of Count Dooku in 42 BBY was perhaps the first major crack in the foundation of Yoda's heart during this era. Dooku had been his greatest pride, a student who possessed a sharp mind and a mastery of the blade that few could hope to match. When Dooku walked away from the Order, it was not just a loss of a powerful ally, it was a personal tragedy for Yoda. He looked at the empty seat where his former apprentice had once sat and felt a profound sense of sorrow. He wondered if his own teachings had been enough, or if the galaxy had become too complex for the ancient ways to hold a man of Dooku's ambition. Yoda allowed Dooku to keep his lightsaber, a choice born of a deep-seated hope that the light within his friend would never truly go out. This moment of grace showed that Yoda valued the bond of the spirit over the strict rules of the Order, yet it was a decision that would weigh heavily on the future. In the years that followed, the feeling of an approaching storm grew stronger. Yoda noticed that the Force was becoming clouded, as if a thin veil of smoke was drifting over the eyes of the Jedi. He would sit for hours in his favorite meditation garden, surrounded by the soft scent of blooming flowers and the gentle trickling of water, yet he could not find the clarity he once possessed. It was a frustrating and humbling experience for the Grandmaster. He began to realize that the Sith, the ancient enemies of the Jedi who were thought to be extinct for 1,000 years, might not be as gone as the history books suggested. He didn't have proof yet, but the intuition of a 900-year-old master is a powerful thing. He taught his students to be extra vigilant, reminding them that the dark side does not always arrive with a roar. Sometimes it comes with a whisper. Then came the year 32 BBY, a year that would alter the course of history forever. The small, peaceful planet of Naboo was suddenly blockaded by the Trade Federation, a sign that the greed of the corporate world was beginning to override the laws of the Republic. But for Yoda, the political crisis was secondary to a meeting that took place within the council chambers. Master Qui-Gon Jinn, a man known for his rebellious spirit and deep connection to the living Force, returned from Naboo with a young boy named Anakin Skywalker. Qui-Gon made a claim that sent shockwaves through the temple. He believed this boy was the chosen one, a figure of legend, destined to bring balance to the Force. Yoda looked down at the small, sandy-haired boy and felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Anakin was brimming with power, more than Yoda had ever seen in a child his age. But beneath that power was a swirling sea of fear and anger. The boy had been born into slavery, and he was deeply attached to the mother he had left behind. Yoda, with his centuries of experience, knew how dangerous these emotions could be. He saw in Anakin a potential for great light, but also a shadow that could swallow the stars. During the boy's testing, Yoda spoke of how fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. He was trying to warn the Council and the boy that the path of a Jedi requires a level of emotional release that Anakin might not be capable of achieving. The Council initially followed Yoda's wisdom and refused to allow the boy to be trained. But then, tragedy struck. Qui-Gon Jinn was killed on Naboo by a mysterious warrior who wielded a red, double-bladed lightsaber. This warrior was undeniably a Sith. The news hit the temple like a thunderclap. The Sith had returned, and they were no longer hiding in the shadows. In the wake of Qui-Gon's death, and with his final wish being that Anakin be trained, the Council reversed its decision. Yoda remained deeply concerned, but he accepted the choice, understanding that the Force moved in ways that even he could not always predict. He watched as Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon's apprentice, took on the heavy burden of training Anakin. Yoda knew that this relationship would be the hinge upon which the fate of the galaxy turned. For the next 10 years, the galaxy teetered on the edge of chaos. Yoda watched as the political system of the Republic began to rot from within. Corruption was everywhere, and a separatist movement, led by none other than the former Jedi Count Dooku, began to pull thousands of star systems away from the government. Yoda felt the tragedy of Dooku's descent into darkness with every fiber of his being. His former student had become a leader of the very forces that threatened to tear the galaxy apart. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and it served as a constant reminder that even the most promising light can be corrupted if it is not nurtured with humility. During this time, Yoda's role as a diplomat and a bridge builder became even more vital. He traveled to many worlds, using his reputation for wisdom to settle disputes and find common ground. On the forest world of Kashyyyk, he strengthened his ties with the Wookiees, a species he respected for their loyalty and their connection to nature. They called him Defender of the Home Tree, a title that reflected the deep bond he had formed with their leaders. He learned their language and their customs, showing that a true master never stops being a student of the world around them. These friendships were not just political, they were genuine connections between souls who valued the preservation of life. The mystery of the Sith continued to haunt him. Who was the master, and who was the apprentice? Yoda knew the rule of two, an ancient Sith philosophy that allowed only two to exist at any one time. If the warrior on Naboo was the apprentice, then a greater threat was still out there, hidden in plain sight. This realization made Yoda more cautious than ever. He began to look at the Senate and the high-ranking officials of the Republic with a wary eye. He could feel the dark side swirling around the Capitol, but it was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. The Sith were using a type of magic that clouded the Jedi's ability to see the future, and for the first time in his life, Yoda felt truly blind. The crisis finally reached a breaking point when Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered a secret army of clones on the ocean world of Kamino. This discovery was wrapped in layers of deception. The army had been ordered by a Jedi Master named Sifo Dyas, who had died a decade earlier, and the genetic template for the soldiers was a bounty hunter named Jango Fett. Yoda was deeply troubled by the existence of this army. It felt like a trap, a pre-packaged war waiting to be unwrapped. But the Republic was under threat, and they had no other way to defend themselves. In a moment of dire necessity, Yoda traveled to Kamino to see the army for himself. He saw millions of soldiers, all with the same face, all bred for nothing but combat. It was a vision that went against everything he believed about the uniqueness of life, yet he felt he had no choice but to lead them. The first battle of the Clone Wars took place on the desert world of Geonosis. Thousands of Jedi had traveled there to rescue Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Senator Padme Amidala, but they were being overwhelmed by a massive army of battle droids. Just as the surviving Jedi were about to be executed in a grand arena, Yoda arrived with the clone army. It was a display of military power that the galaxy had not seen in a millennium. Yoda sat in the command center of a massive transport ship, coordinating the movements of thousands of troops. He was no longer just a teacher in a garden, he was a general in a galactic war. On the dusty plains of Geonosis, Yoda finally came face to face with his old apprentice, Dooku. The confrontation was a heart-wrenching display of what had been lost. Dooku, now using the title Count and wielding a curved red lightsaber, mocked Yoda's age and the fading power of the Jedi. But Yoda showed that his small size was a mask for a speed and agility that defied belief. He moved like a green blur, his small lightsaber clashing against Dooku's in a shower of sparks. He used the Force to catch falling pillars and deflect blasts of lightning, showing that his connection to the light was still an unbreakable shield. Dooku was forced to flee, but the victory felt hollow. Yoda knew that this was not the end of the war, but the beginning of a long and bloody chapter. As the war dragged on for years, Yoda found himself carrying a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. He was responsible for sending young men and women into battle, like many of whom never returned. He spent his nights in the temple, listening to the names of the fallen being read in the halls. He could feel the pain of every loss, a constant thrumming of grief in the Force. To cope with this, he threw himself into the guidance of his fellow Jedi. He wanted to make sure that they didn't lose their souls in the heat of combat. He reminded them that they were peacekeepers, not soldiers, and that their primary duty was still to protect life, even in the middle of a war. He took a special interest in the clones themselves. While many in the Republic saw them as disposable tools, Yoda saw them as living beings with their own spirits. He insisted on calling them by their names rather than their numbers, and he often took the time to speak with them before a mission. He wanted them to know that they were more than just biological machines. They were part of the living Force. This kindness earned him the undying loyalty of the soldiers he commanded, but it also made the eventual betrayal all the more painful. One of the most profound turning points in Yoda's life occurred near the end of the war. While meditating, he heard a voice that should have been silent forever, the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn. At first, the other members of the council feared that Yoda was being manipulated or that his mind was finally beginning to fail him after 9 centuries. They put him through medical tests and suggested he take a rest. But Yoda knew what he had heard. He knew that the Force was trying to teach him something that the Jedi had forgotten. He realized that the war was a distraction, a grand game designed to blind the Jedi to the true nature of their enemy. Guided by the spirit of Qui-Gon, Yoda embarked on a secret and lonely journey. He traveled first to the swamp world of Dagobah, a place teeming with life and ancient energy. There, he entered a cave that was a focal point for the dark side. Within its damp, mossy walls, he faced a vision of the future that was more terrifying than any battlefield. He saw the fall of the Jedi, the rise of a dark empire, and the slaughter of those he loved. But he also saw a flicker of hope, a distant light that promised a rebirth. This experience taught him that to truly defeat the dark side, one must first understand the darkness within oneself. His journey then took him to the very heart of the galaxy, to a mysterious planet where life itself began. There he met the Force priestesses, ancient beings who represented different aspects of the spirit: joy, anger, confusion, sadness, and serenity. They put him through a series of trials designed to test his humility and his resolve. He had to confront a dark version of himself, a small, twisted creature that represented all his hidden doubts and his secret pride. Yoda realized that he had been so focused on being a master that he had sometimes forgotten to be a simple servant of the light. By acknowledging his own flaws, he was able to absorb his shadow and find a new level of inner peace. The final trial took place on Moraband, the ancient home world of the Sith. It was a desolate, wind-swept world of red dust and crumbling tombs. As Yoda walked through the Valley of the Dark Lords, he was haunted by the spirits of ancient Sith, including the legendary Darth Bane. They tried to tempt him with power and frighten him with visions of death, but Yoda stood firm. He understood that the Sith's power was built on a foundation of lies and fear. He faced a final illusion created by the hidden Sith Lord, a vision where he had to choose between winning the war and saving the life of Anakin Skywalker. Yoda chose the life of the boy, proving that his compassion was stronger than his desire for military victory. Through these trials, Yoda learned the ultimate secret: how to retain one's individual consciousness after death. This was a power the Sith could never achieve, for they were too afraid to let go of their physical lives. Yoda understood that by becoming a part of the cosmic force, he could continue to guide the Jedi even after his body had returned to the Earth. This knowledge gave him a sense of peace that allowed him to face the coming darkness with a steady heart. He knew that the Jedi Order as he knew it was doomed, but he also knew that the light would eventually find a way to return. When he returned to Coruscant, he did not tell the Council everything he had seen. He knew they were not ready to hear that the war they were fighting was already lost. Instead, he focused on preparing for the end. He watched Anakin Skywalker with a mixture of hope and dread. He saw the boy's secret marriage to Senator Padme Amidala and the growing influence of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. Yoda could feel the net closing around the Jedi, but he also felt that any attempt to strike first would only accelerate their fall. He chose to wait, to watch, and to keep the flicker of hope alive in his own heart. As the war reached its final stages, the tragedy intensified. Anakin came to him, troubled by visions of Padme's death. Yoda gave him the best advice he could: train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. It was a profound truth, but for a young man consumed by passion and fear, it felt like cold comfort. Yoda realized that the Jedi's focus on detachment had made them distant from the very people they were trying to save. He saw the flaws in the system he had helped build over the centuries, but it was too late to change it now. The gears of destiny were already turning, and the shadow was about to fall. The final days of the Republic were a blur of violence and betrayal. Yoda was on the planet Kashyyyk, helping his Wookiee friends defend their home from a separatist invasion when the world shattered. He felt a sudden, massive disturbance in the Force, a scream of thousands of voices suddenly silenced. Across the galaxy, the clone troopers, the men he had treated as individuals and friends, had received a secret command. They turned their weapons on their Jedi commanders, executing them in cold blood. Yoda felt each death as a physical blow to his chest. He was knocked to the ground by the sheer weight of the tragedy. When his own clone commanders, including a man he had trusted, turned to kill him, Yoda acted with the reflexes of a predator. He did not hesitate, for he knew that the men he had known were gone, replaced by a command they could not disobey. He escaped into the forests of Kashyyyk with the help of the Wookiees, Chewbacca and Tarful. As he looked back at the smoke rising from the battlefields, he knew that the age of the Jedi was over. The temple on Coruscant had been attacked, the students he had loved were dead, and his former apprentice, Anakin Skywalker, had fallen to the dark side. Yoda returned to Coruscant in secret, meeting with Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the few other survivors. Together they entered the ruined temple, a place that had been their home for centuries. The sight of the fallen younglings was almost more than the ancient master could bear. He saw the security records and witnessed the terrible truth. Anakin had become Darth Vader, the new apprentice to the Sith Lord who had been hiding in the Senate all along. Chancellor Palpatine, now Emperor of the Galaxy. In a final, desperate attempt to stop the darkness, Yoda went to face the Emperor alone. Their duel in the heart of the Senate chamber was the ultimate clash of ideologies. Palpatine, cackling with dark joy, threw the very symbols of Republic democracy at the small Jedi Master. Yoda fought with everything he had, catching the Emperor's lightning and throwing it back. But as the battle reached its peak, Yoda realized that he could not win this fight. The Sith had been preparing for this moment for 1,000 years, while the Jedi had been complacent. He understood that the time for open war had passed. He had to survive so that he could protect the future. He retreated into the shadows, a fallen Grandmaster of a fallen order. He met with Obi-Wan and the senator from Alderaan, Bail Organa, to decide the fate of Anakin's newborn twin children, Luke and Leia. Yoda knew that these children were the key to everything. They represented a new chance, a way to rebuild the Jedi without the mistakes of the past. He sent Obi-Wan to watch over Luke on Tatooine, and he himself began his long journey into exile. He chose Dagobah as his sanctuary, the world where he had first begun his spiritual journey. He arrived in a small survival pod, carrying nothing but his wisdom and the heavy weight of his memories. As he stepped out into the humid, misty swamps, he looked up at the stars and felt a strange sense of hope. He was alone, his order was gone, and the galaxy was ruled by a tyrant. But the Force was still there, moving through the trees and the water. Yoda knew that he was not just waiting to die. He was waiting for the moment when the light would be ready to rise again. He began to build a small hut out of mud and wood, a humble home for the greatest teacher the galaxy had ever known. In the silence of the swamp, Yoda began his longest meditation. He spoke with the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn, continuing to learn the secrets of the Force that transcended physical life. He watched from afar as the twins grew, their presence in the Force like two tiny sparks in a vast darkness. He lived a simple life, eating the plants of the swamp and listening to the rhythms of the world around him. He was no longer a general or a high-ranking leader. He was once again a student of the universe. He spent 20 years in this solitude, a period of time that would have driven a lesser being to madness. But for Yoda, it was a time of refinement. He was shedding the last of his attachments, preparing himself for the final task the Force would ask of him. He knew that one day, a young man would come to this swamp seeking answers. He knew that he would have to be the one to guide this new hope, to teach him the lessons that had taken 9 centuries to learn. Yoda prepared his heart for this meeting, knowing that it would be his final contribution to the story of the stars. He looked at his small green hands, now wrinkled with even more age, and smiled. He had survived the rise and fall of a republic, the betrayal of his friends, and the destruction of his life's work. Yet, he was not broken. He was Master Yoda, and the Force was with him, now and forever. The winds of Dagobah whispered through the trees, carrying the sense of growth and decay. In this balance, Yoda found his peace. He was the guardian of a flame that the wind could not blow out. He was the memory of a better time and the promise of a brighter one. As he waited in the mist, he was not just a small figure in a swamp. He was a giant in the spirit, a pillar of light that the darkness could never truly touch. His story was far from over, for as long as there were those who sought wisdom and justice, the name of Yoda would continue to echo through the centuries. The long silence of Dagobah was not a void, but a symphony of life that played without ceasing. And for Master Yoda, It became the classroom where he learned his most difficult lessons. For 20 years, the humid air of the swamp was his only companion, a thick veil of moisture that clung to his green skin and settled into the deep wrinkles of his brow. In the beginning, the transition from the bustling heart of a galactic civilization to the isolation of a remote bog was a shock to the system, but Yoda did not view his surroundings as a prison. Instead, he saw the swamp as a living expression of the Force itself. Here, there were no politicians, no grand military strategies, and no metallic halls to echo the footsteps of thousands. There was only the sound of insects humming in the heavy air, the splash of creatures moving through the dark water, and the slow, rhythmic breathing of a world that cared nothing for the rise and fall of empires. In those first years of exile, Yoda spent much of his time simply listening. He sat on the gnarled roots of the great gnarl tree that sheltered his humble home, his eyes closed, his mind reaching out to touch the life that vibrated all around him. He realized that during the centuries he spent on Coruscant, the Jedi had become distracted by the artificial rhythms of the city and the complex demands of the Republic. They had lived in a world of stone and light, separated from the raw, pulsing energy of nature. On Dagobah, everything was connected in a cycle of growth and decay that was honest and unapologetic. The moss that grew on the rocks was as much a part of the Force as the greatest Jedi Master, and the small creatures that lived and died in the undergrowth were weaving a tapestry of energy that was beautiful in its simplicity. This period of his life was marked by a deep and ongoing conversation with the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn. The deceased master, who had been the first to discover the path back from the cosmic force, was a constant presence in Yoda's meditations. They spoke of the fundamental nature of existence, and Yoda became a student once more, learning the techniques required to maintain his identity after his physical form eventually failed. This was not a set of facts or a list of instructions, but a spiritual transformation. He had to learn how to let go of his ego entirely, to become a vessel for the light without losing the essence of who he was. It was a journey of profound humility. He looked back on the history of the Jedi, reflecting on the ancient rules and the rigid structures they had built over 1,000 generations. He began to see that their strict adherence to a specific way of thinking, their traditional Jedi tenets, had sometimes acted as a wall between them and the truth they sought to serve. Yoda's thoughts often drifted to the survivors of the Great Purge. He could feel the cold, sharp presence of Darth Vader moving through the stars like a predator, and he felt the flickers of other Jedi as they were found and extinguished by the Empire's hunters. Each loss was a sting, a reminder of the failure that had led them to this dark era. Yet, he also felt the presence of Obi-Wan Kenobi on the desert world of Tatooine. Their connection was a thin, golden thread that spanned the distance of the galaxy, a silent promise that the mission was still alive. Together, they watched over the children of Anakin Skywalker from afar. Yoda could sense the young Luke Skywalker growing up under the twin suns, his spirit bright and impatient, a mirror of the father he had never known. He also sensed Leia Organa on the world of Alderaan, growing into a leader of courage and conviction. These two children were the seeds of the future, and Yoda knew that his role was to wait until the soil was ready for them to grow. The choice of Dagobah as a hiding place was not accidental. The planet was home to a cave that was a powerful focal point of the dark side of the Force. Most would have fled such a place, but Yoda understood the importance of balance. He lived near the cave, not because he was drawn to its shadow, but because his own immense light served to mask the dark energy, and the dark energy, in turn, helped hide his presence from the Emperor's prying eyes. It was a symbiotic relationship of energies. Occasionally, Yoda would venture near the entrance of the cave, feeling the chill of its influence. He remembered the nameless horrors he had encountered centuries ago during the High Republic, the creatures that fed on the Force and turned Jedi to dust. He realized that the darkness was not a thing to be merely destroyed, for it was a natural part of the universe's shadow. The challenge was to acknowledge it without allowing it to take root in the heart. As the years stretched into decades, Yoda's physical form continued to age, but his spirit became more vibrant. He found joy in the small things, the taste of a root leaf stew, the sight of a rare flower blooming in the moonlight, and the playful games he played with the local wildlife. He became a master of the environment, moving through the swamp with a grace that ignored the passage of time. He was no longer the grandmaster who sat on a high council. He was the hermit of the bog, a being who had found the secret of peace in the middle of a galactic storm. He understood that the Force did not belong to the Jedi, nor did it belong to the Sith. It was a living current that moved through all things, and his only job was to stay in harmony with that current. When the moment finally came that the Force shifted, Yoda felt it instantly. The destruction of Alderaan was a cataclysm that shook the very foundations of the galaxy, a massive wound in the energy of the universe. He felt the loss of millions of lives, and shortly after, he felt the passing of his old friend, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The thread of their connection did not break, however. It simply changed. Obi-Wan had become one with the Force, and his spirit was now free to guide the next generation. Yoda knew then that his time of waiting was coming to an end. The son of Skywalker was on his way, and the final chapter of Yoda's long story was about to begin. The arrival of Luke Skywalker and his X-Wing starfighter was a noisy intrusion into the quiet world of Dagobah. Yoda watched from the shadows as the young man crashed into the swamp, his frustration and impatience radiating through the Force like a beacon. Yoda saw the boy's youth, his lack of focus, and the heavy burden of expectation he carried. He decided to test the boy's character before revealing his true identity. He put on the persona of a silly, troublesome creature of the swamp, poking through Luke's belongings and stealing his dinner. He wanted to see how the boy treated a being he considered beneath him. He wanted to know if Luke possessed the patience and the kindness that his father had lacked. The interactions between the crazy old man and the aspiring hero were a masterclass in psychological teaching. Yoda frustrated Luke at every turn, acting as an obstacle and a nuisance. He watched as Luke's temper flared, his eyes searching for a great warrior and failing to see the master standing right in front of him. This was the first and most important lesson, that greatness is not found in strength or status, but in the spirit. When Luke finally expressed his frustration to the spirit of Obi-Wan, Yoda dropped the act. The transition was profound. His voice deepened, his posture straightened, and the immense power of his presence filled the small clearing. "I cannot train him," Yoda told Obi-Wan, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries. "The boy has no patience." Yoda's initial reluctance was genuine. He saw so much of Anakin in Luke. The same reckless energy, the same fear for his friends, the same desire for action over understanding. He knew that the stakes were higher than they had ever been. If Luke failed, if he turned to the dark side as his father had, the galaxy would be lost to a darkness that might never lift. But Obi-Wan's spirit was persistent, and eventually, Yoda agreed to take on his final apprentice. The training that followed was unlike anything that had ever occurred in the Jedi Temple of old. There were no lightsaber forms or historical lectures. There was only the raw, difficult work of breaking down the barriers in Luke's mind. Yoda pushed Luke to his physical and mental limits. He made the boy run through the thick mud with him strapped to his back, whispering lessons in his ear about the nature of the Force. He taught him that a Jedi's strength flows from the Force and that he must use it for knowledge and defense, never for attack. He forced Luke to confront his own preconceptions. When Luke tried to lift his sunken starfighter from the swamp and failed, complaining that it was too big, Yoda's response became one of the most famous teachings in the history of the stars. "Size matters not," he told him. "Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you? And well, you should not. For my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is." To demonstrate the truth of his words, Yoda closed his eyes and reached out with his small three-fingered hand. He didn't struggle, he didn't strain. He simply connected with the energy of the ship and the energy of the water, and with a slow, graceful movement, he lifted the massive metallic vessel into the air and set it down on dry land. The look of pure disbelief on Luke's face was exactly what Yoda wanted. "I don't believe it," the boy whispered. "That," Yoda replied, "is why you fail." He was trying to show Luke that the only limits that exist are the ones we place upon ourselves through our lack of faith in the living energy of the universe. The most dangerous part of Luke's training was his encounter with the dark side cave. Yoda sent him inside, telling him that he would find only what he brought with him. He warned the boy not to take his weapons, but Luke, driven by fear, ignored the advice. Inside the damp, shadowed depths, Luke faced a vision of Darth Vader. He struck the Phantom down, only to see his own face beneath the mask. Yoda watched from outside, feeling the boy's fear and the failure of the trial. He knew then that Luke was still far from ready. The boy was still fighting an external enemy instead of the darkness within himself. As the training continued, Yoda grew fond of Luke, despite the boy's many flaws. He saw the spark of goodness that was uniquely Luke's, a capacity for compassion that might actually be the key to defeating the Emperor. But then, disaster struck. Luke had a vision of his friends in pain on the city in the clouds, Bespin. He was consumed by the need to save them, an attachment that Yoda knew could be his undoing. Yoda and the spirit of Obi-Wan pleaded with him to stay, to finish his training so that he would have the strength to face the trap that had been set for him. If you leave now, help them you could, Yoda warned, but you would destroy all for which they have fought and suffered. Luke's departure was a moment of profound sadness for Yoda. He stood on the landing pad, watching the X-Wing disappear into the sky, feeling like history was repeating itself. He had seen too many students rush off into the fire, thinking their passion was the same as their strength. He turned to Obi-Wan's spirit and whispered that the boy was their last hope. When Obi-Wan reminded him that there was another, Yoda nodded, thinking of Leia. He knew that even if Luke fell, the light would find another way, but the path would be much harder and much longer. In the time after Luke left, Yoda returned to his solitude, but the swamp felt different. The end was near. He could feel it. His body was finally beginning to give out, the 900 years of service finally taking their toll. He spent his days in quiet reflection, preparing himself for the final transition. He was not afraid. He had seen the cycle of life and death too many times to fear his own part in it. He knew that death was just another step on the journey, a way to become one with the energy he had served his entire life. He had taught Luke as much as he could in the time they had, and now he had to trust that the seeds he had planted would find a way to bloom, even in the middle of a war. Yoda's thoughts during these final months were filled with the faces of the past. He thought of his own masters, the thousands of students he had guided, and the friends he had lost. He thought of the Republic he had tried to protect and the mistakes he had made. He realized that the true legacy of a teacher is not the information they pass on, but the spirit of inquiry and the courage to face the truth that they instill in their pupils. He had tried to give Luke that courage. He had tried to show him that the Force is not a weapon to be wielded, but a mystery to be lived. When Luke finally returned to Dagobah a year later, he found a master who was fading fast. Yoda was resting in his bed, his breathing shallow, his eyes cloudy with age. But his mind was as sharp as ever. He confirmed the terrible truth that Luke had learned, that Darth Vader was indeed his father. This was a heavy burden for the young man, but Yoda knew he had to face it. He also told Luke that his training was complete, but that one final task remained. He must confront Vader again. Only then a Jedi will you be, he said. He was telling Luke that being a Jedi is not a rank granted by a council, but a state of being achieved through the ultimate test of one's convictions. In his final moments, Yoda spoke of the other Skywalker, revealing to Luke that he had a sister. He wanted Luke to know that he was not alone, and that the future of the Jedi did not rest on his shoulders alone. With a final, peaceful breath, the greatest of the Jedi Masters let go. His physical form vanished, leaving only his clothes behind, as he merged fully and finally with the cosmic force. He had completed his journey on the physical plane, a journey that had spanned nearly a millennium and had touched the lives of billions. He was now part of the stars, part of the wind, and part of the light that would eventually wash away the darkness of the Empire. But Yoda's story did not end with his death. As he had learned from Qui-Gon, the spirit remains. He was now a being of pure light, capable of appearing to those who needed his guidance. He watched from the spirit realm as Luke faced the Emperor and his father on the second Death Star. He saw the moment when Luke threw away his lightsaber, refusing to give in to hate, and he felt the redemption of Anakin Skywalker as the Father saved the Son. It was a victory of the spirit over the sword, exactly as Yoda had always taught. The balance was finally restored, and the shadow that had hung over the galaxy for decades was finally lifted. The celebration on the forest moon of Endor was a moment of pure joy. As the rebels and the Wookiees and the Ewoks danced around the bonfires, three spirits stood in the shadows, watching over the young hero. There was Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Yoda. Yoda looked at Luke with a smile of pride. His final apprentice had done what no other Jedi could. He had defeated the Sith not through violence, but through the power of love and forgiveness. It was the ultimate validation of Yoda's long life of teaching. He had helped create a new kind of Jedi, one who understood that the heart is the most powerful tool of all. Even in the years of peace that followed, Yoda's influence continued to be felt. Luke began to rebuild the Jedi Order, and he used the lessons he had learned in the swamp as the foundation for his new temple. He spoke of the small green master who could lift a starship with a thought and who saw the potential for good in everyone. Yoda's words echoed through the new generations of students, a reminder that the Force is always present, always waiting to be found by those who are humble enough to look. Yet, Yoda knew that the struggle between light and dark is eternal. He watched as new challenges arose, as the remnants of the Empire sought to regain their power, and as the hearts of men continued to be tested. He was no longer a general or a judge, but he remained a witness. He was the memory of the light, a guiding star for any who lost their way. He had learned that the galaxy is a vast and complicated place, but that the truth of the Force is simple. It is the energy that binds us, the light that guides us, and the home to which we all eventually return. The transition from the physical world into the realm of the eternal was not like falling asleep, nor was it like walking through a door. For Master Yoda, becoming one with the Force was like a drop of rain finally returning to a vast, shimmering ocean. He no longer had a body that felt the ache of 9 centuries or the damp chill of the Dagobah night. Instead, he became a part of the very energy that he had spent his entire life studying and serving. In this state, time did not move in a straight line. He could see the past, the present, and the potential futures all swirling together like colors in a great cosmic bowl. He could feel the joy of a child being born on a distant world and the sorrow of a star dying in a lonely corner of the galaxy. He was everywhere and nowhere, a whisper in the wind and a spark in the heart of every living thing. Yet, through the techniques he had learned from Qui-Gon Jinn and the Force priestesses, he maintained the essence of who he was, the small green teacher with a sharp wit and a heart full of light. In the years following the great victory at Endor, Yoda watched with a sense of quiet observation as the galaxy began the slow, difficult process of healing. He saw the New Republic rise from the ashes of the Empire, and he saw the people of 1,000 worlds begin to look at the stars without fear. But his primary focus remained on Luke Skywalker. Luke was the torchbearer, the one responsible for bringing the Jedi back into a world that had almost forgotten them. Yoda's spirit often lingered near Luke, a warm presence that provided comfort during the young man's most lonely hours. He did not always speak. Sometimes the best lesson a teacher can give is simply to be there, a silent reminder that the student is never truly alone. He watched as Luke traveled the galaxy, searching for lost scrolls, ancient artifacts, and the forgotten history of the Order. Yoda saw the weight of responsibility on Luke's shoulders, a weight he knew all too well, and he admired the way the young man carried it with humility. During this era, Yoda spent a great deal of time, in the spiritual sense, reflecting on the nature of the Force. He understood now, more than ever, that the Force was not just a tool for the Jedi or a weapon for the Sith. It was a conversation between all living things. He realized that the old order, for all its greatness, had sometimes tried to dominate that conversation rather than listen to it. They had created rules and structures that were meant to protect the light, but sometimes those very structures became barriers to understanding. He thought about the thousands of students he had taught and wondered if he had focused too much on their abilities and not enough on their hearts. This was the wisdom of the afterlife, the ability to look back without the distractions of ego or politics. He saw that the true strength of a Jedi was not in their mastery of the blade, but in their ability to stay connected to the simple, humble truth of life. When Luke eventually began to train a new generation of Jedi, Yoda watched with a mixture of hope and caution. He saw the excitement in the eyes of the new students, and he felt the familiar rhythm of training and meditation returning to the galaxy. He saw Luke building a new school on a quiet world, trying to create a place of peace. But Yoda also felt the shadows beginning to gather once more. The dark side is never truly gone. It is a part of the natural balance, and it always waits for an opening. He saw a young boy named Ben Solo, the son of Han and Leia, and he felt the immense power within him, a power that was joined to a deep and restless conflict. Yoda recognized the signs, for they were the same signs he had seen in Anakin Skywalker nearly a century before. He felt the pull of the shadows on the boy's heart, and he felt the influence of a dark presence reaching out from the unknown regions of space. Yoda understood that he could not interfere directly. The living must make their own choices, for that is the only way they can truly learn. He watched the tragedy unfold, the betrayal, the destruction of the new school, and the fall of Ben Solo into the persona of Kylo Ren. He felt the devastating blow this dealt to Luke's spirit. He saw his student, the hero of the galaxy, retreat into a shell of guilt and shame. Luke felt that he had failed not just his nephew, but the entire legacy of the Jedi. He saw Luke walk away from his friends, his family, and the Force itself, choosing to live in exile on the distant rocky island of Ahch-To. For years, Yoda watched as Luke lived in silence, his heart closed to the universe, waiting for his own life to end. It was a period of profound sadness for the ancient master, yet he did not despair. He knew that the Force had its own timing, and that even the deepest winter eventually gives way to spring. The arrival of a young woman named Rey on the island of Ahch-To was the spark that finally drew Yoda back into a more active role. Rey was a mystery, a scavenger from a desert world who possessed a connection to the Force that was as raw and powerful as a storm. Yoda saw in her the same potential he had seen in the very first Jedi who walked the earth. He saw her struggle to convince Luke to return, and he saw Luke's stubborn refusal to pick up the mantle of leadership again. He watched as Luke prepared to burn down the ancient library of the Jedi, believing that the time had come for the Order to end permanently. This was the moment Yoda had been waiting for. He knew that Luke needed a final lesson, one that only his old master could provide. On a night filled with the scent of sea salt and the sound of crashing waves, Yoda appeared to Luke beside the ancient Uneti tree that housed the sacred texts. He didn't arrive with a grand announcement. He simply manifested in the flickering light of the flames, as small and mischievous as he had been in the swamps of Dagobah. He watched as Luke hesitated to set the tree on fire, his heart still tied to the past even as he claimed he wanted to destroy it. With a playful gesture and a flick of his wrist, Yoda summoned a bolt of lightning from the sky, setting the tree ablaze himself. The shock on Luke's face was priceless, a reminder of the days when Yoda used to steal his dinner and hit his shins with a cane. "The sacred Jedi texts," Luke cried out in horror, watching the history of the Order go up in smoke. But Yoda only laughed, a sound that carried the wisdom of 900 years. "Read them, have you?" he asked, knowing full well that Luke had found the ancient books to be a bit of a bore. He told Luke that the books contained nothing that Rey did not already possess within herself. This was a profound teaching about the nature of wisdom. He wanted Luke to understand that the truth of the Force is not contained in old paper or ink. It lives in the hearts of those who serve the light. The books were just pointers, symbol journey that must be lived to be understood. It was during this conversation that Yoda delivered his most important lesson to the modern age. Luke was consumed by his failure to save Ben, his failure to rebuild the Jedi, and his failure to live up to the legend. Yoda looked at his student with eyes that had seen empires crumble and stars go dark. "The greatest teacher, failure is," he said. This was the truth that the old order had often forgotten. They had tried so hard to be perfect, to be beyond reproach, that they had become afraid of making mistakes. But Yoda understood that failure is not a sign of the end. It is the most powerful tool for growth. It strips away pride, it demands humility, and it forces a person to find a new way forward. By embracing his failure, Luke could finally move beyond it. "We are what they grow beyond," Yoda told him, looking out at the burning tree. "That is the true burden of all masters." He was telling Luke that the goal of a teacher is not to create a copy of themselves, but to give the student the foundation to become something even greater. The Jedi did not need to be rebuilt in the image of the past. They needed to evolve to become what the galaxy needed in the present. This lesson gave Luke the strength he needed to perform one final legendary act of sacrifice, projecting his spirit across the galaxy to save the Resistance and give the spark of hope a chance to grow into a fire. Yoda watched as Luke became one with the Force, welcoming his student into the eternal light with a sense of completion. The cycle was moving forward, and the light was in good hands. In the final struggle against the resurrected Emperor Palpatine, Yoda's voice was among the chorus of Jedi who reached out to Rey in her darkest hour. He was not alone. He was joined by Obi-Wan, Anakin, Ahsoka, Qui-Gon, Mace Windu, and countless others who had served the light throughout the centuries. They were no longer individuals divided by time or rank. They were a singular force of ancestors, lending their strength to the young woman who stood as the final shield against the dark. "Rise, Rey," Yoda's voice whispered in her mind, a steady anchor in the middle of the Emperor's storm. He reminded her that she was not alone, that the strength of all the Jedi who had ever lived was flowing through her. This was the ultimate realization of Yoda's philosophy, that the light is a collective heritage, a flame that is passed from hand to hand, and that as long as one person holds it, it can never be truly extinguished. As the shadow of the Sith was finally cast out and the galaxy began to breathe again, Yoda's spirit found a deep and lasting peace. He had seen the story through to its conclusion, from the height of the High Republic to the fall of the Empire and the rebirth of hope. He had spent 900 years in the physical world, and he would spend an eternity in the spiritual one. Yet his message remained as simple as it was the day he first stepped into the Jedi Temple. He taught that the Force is a gift, a connection that requires nothing but a humble heart and a willing spirit. He taught that size, status, and physical power are nothing compared to the strength of one's convictions. He taught that we must always be ready to learn, even when we think we are masters, and that we must always be ready to let go, even when we think we cannot survive the loss. Looking back on the legend of Yoda, one sees a tapestry woven with threads of humor, tragedy, power, and profound kindness. He was a being who could fight a Sith Lord with the ferocity of a hurricane, and then spend an hour helping a child find a lost toy. He was a creature of immense mystery who never forgot the value of a good joke. He was a leader who knew when to command, and a servant who knew when to listen. His life was a testament to the idea that the greatest power in the universe is not the ability to destroy, but the ability to inspire. He shaped the destiny of the galaxy not by ruling it, but by teaching it how to see itself more clearly. The swamp of Dagobah is still there, the mist still hanging low over the dark water, and the insects still humming their eternal song. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant may be a memory, and the stars may continue to shift in their ancient patterns, but the spirit of Yoda remains an inseparable part of the Star Wars galaxy. He is in the rustle of the leaves, the shimmer of the holocron, and the steady breath of every student who closes their eyes to feel the energy around them. He is the reminder that even the smallest being can change the course of history, and that wisdom is a light that can never be hidden by the dark. His journey, which began in the shadows of a hidden world nearly 1,000 years ago, continues in every act of courage and every moment of compassion that happens under the light of 100 billion suns. For 9 centuries, he walked the path. He saw the rise of heroes and the fall of villains. He laughed, he cried, he fought, and he waited. And in the end, he found that the Force was exactly what he had always told his students it was: a companion that never leaves, a guide that never fails, and a home that is always waiting. Master Yoda's story is not just a chronicle of events. It is a map for the soul, a reminder that we are all part of something much larger than ourselves. As long as there is life, as long as there is hope, And as long as there are those who seek the light, the small green master will be there, leaning on his cane, a twinkle in his eye, whispering for us to listen to the song of the universe. The legacy he left behind is not one of monuments or empires, but of living wisdom. He showed the galaxy that the true measure of a person is not found in their triumphs, but in how they handle their defeats. He taught that fear is a shadow that disappears when you turn toward the light, and that the past is a teacher, not a prison. He taught us to look beyond what we see with our eyes and to trust what we feel in our spirits. In the quiet moments of the night, if one listens closely enough, one might still hear that distinctive voice, putting the words in a different order but carrying a truth that is universal. He is the Grand Master, the Hermit, the General, and the Friend. He is Yoda, and the Force will be with him, always. His long life was a circle that finally closed, yet the ripples it created will continue to touch the shores of distant worlds for as long as there are stars in the sky. He was the anchor of the Jedi, the conscience of the Republic, and the grandfather of a new era. In a galaxy of infinite possibilities, he was the constant, the small point of green light that never wavered. Through war and peace, through glory and exile, he remained true to the light. And that, more than anything else, is why his name will be whispered by the storytellers of the galaxy for 10,000 years to come. He was a master of the Force, but more importantly, he was a master of himself. He has found his peace, and in doing so, he has shown us all the way to find our own. The stars continue to shine, the planets continue to turn, and the Force continues to flow. Somewhere in the vastness of the cosmos, a small figure smiles, knowing that the journey never truly ends. It just changes shape, like a cloud in the sky or a wave in the sea. The lessons have been taught, the seeds have been planted, and the light is eternal. And as the final echoes of his physical life fade into the great silence, the wisdom of Master Yoda remains, a gift to all who walk the path of the stars. In the end, he was exactly what he appeared to be, a simple teacher who loved the world and everyone in it, and that is the greatest legend of all.